Have any of you ever seen a rock concert on TV? Or maybe even been to one personally? How did the audience react to the music? Well, did they just sit quietly in their seats and listen? Man, I sure wouldn't. No, they were all en masse, swaying and clapping and dancing and jumping to the beat. They were actually being controlled. I want to say to everyone here today, it's true. We're gonna have a good time. We're gonna have a good time. We're gonna have a good time.
Hello and welcome to Trolling with Logic, where we bring the hammer down on pseudoscience, ignorance, and unreason on a bi-weekly basis. I'm your host, Nathan, and with me today is Jen and Kitch. How you guys doing?
Doing well. I've got my coffee with my Irish cream, so I'm ready to do this.
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I've got some pizza here. Yes, sorted. Whatever. Let's go for it. Let's hit this shit.
Yeah, Buck Mulligan was meant to be here, but he hasn't shown up. Maybe he'll show up later in this episode. Who knows?
Yeah, his name is Buck, and he likes to fuck off.
Well, we are doing a movie review today, which we meant to do last episode, and Buck was here for that, and we talked about Alien Contact, which was an off-the-cuff thing because he hadn't watched what we're watching or talking about today. So the movie we all watched is called Rock, It's Your Decision. This movie was made in 1982, and it's one of those Christian propaganda movies that lash out at certain aspects of society and culture. In this case, the boogeyman is rock music. This is basically the reefer madness of anti-rock propaganda. And yes, anti-rock films are a genre in Christian filmmaking. There have been several documentaries made by Christian groups that denounce rock music in the strongest possible terms, the most entertaining of which is probably Eric Holmberg's Hell's Bells, The Dangers of Rock and Roll, which came out 7 years after this one did. Anyway, the movie that we're reviewing today actually tells a story with actors and a narrative script. Any opening thoughts on this movie from either of you?
Well, I haven't listened to any rock and roll since, so I think it's done its job.
It's a just to surmise this movie, it's a depressing look at how over-religious parents push a young man against the thing he loves, turning him into a horrible, just unlikable, awful person who just becomes socially inept, destroys his social life, and destroys any semblance of a personality he has. It's truly a brilliant anti-religion film.
Yeah, I'd say that was pretty good synopsis, actually. Yeah.
Yep, that pretty much sums it all up in a nice little package.
Brilliant. Good job, guys.
I think it was the Cinema Snob, or it might have been someone else, I can't remember, who made the comment that if you watch this movie in reverse, it's about fundamentalist, pious Christian kid who becomes a hardcore rock fanatic.
Well, hardcore is a bit much. Well, it's not really hardcore because it wasn't really that bad going into it. But then again, This is a Christian propaganda film, so...
Well, the first scene of this movie has Jeff Sims, the name of the Christian teenager, who's the main character, barging out of his house after his mom yells at him and saying, "Mom, get off my back!" because of his rock music. And then he drives away and almost gets in a car accident.
He wasn't a mosher, though, was he? I mean, he wasn't like... He was listening to death metal and, all that kind of stuff. He wasn't hardcore. He was just a bit of a petulant teenager, really, at the start, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was actually listening to some pretty tame stuff throughout.
Yeah. I think that was because maybe the people who made the film, they didn't want themselves to listen to the hardcore stuff. Because they feared that perhaps Satan would get them during the making of the film, so they had to use the slightly less, erotic and sexually deviant versions of what was around at the time, perhaps.
I actually did a search for when the different bits of music were playing in certain scenes. I transcribed down the lyrics that were playing and tried to search for it online to see what songs they were using.
Yeah.
Can't walk on the water.
and nothing came up at all. So the rock music in this movie is completely made up.
I was thinking they had to use royalty-free music because you can see in one of the scenes that the album covers have their names blacked out.
Satan must have done that, though.
It's a much better explanation than what I was thinking, which was maybe the directors just thought that if they actually played some actual hardcore heavy metal, they might actually lose some of their followers to, good music.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, there was a scene in the record store in the mall when he was going through and doing his quote-unquote research, and you could see a cover of a Bob Seger album, but that's about it. But let's go through the scene by scene in League of Nerds style. As we said, the movie tells the story of a Christian teenager named Jeff Sims, who's dealing with some interpersonal conflicts in his life thanks to his love of rock music. The beginning bits of the movie imply that normally, in the absence of rock music, he's this good, moral, upstanding kind of kid, but that whenever he listens to rock, he suddenly transforms into a rebellious jerk, as if some sinister influence is taking him over. And actually, this theme is developed further. Other characters in this movie, Jim Owen, the youth pastor, gives off a really creepy vibe, I think, and I'm just going to refer to him as Milton Mamet from The Walking Dead. He bears a striking resemblance to him, and every time I see him, that's who I think of.
Do you find all pastors creepy now that you've left the faith? Because I find quite a lot of pastors, or over here priests, creepy anyway. I get that vibe from most of them these days.
I actually don't know a lot of preachers currently, but yeah, when I see them like in a video or in an audio recording or something, yeah, I do get at least a little bit of that vibe.
I was a Catholic, so...
It takes a certain kind of person, doesn't it, to do something like that? And I can remember still when I went to Leona's dad's funeral. He died, unfortunately, shortly after we met. Sorry to give the show on a downer already, but...
That's all right.
We went round to the church and the funeral, and it was just this real authoritarian kind of... And I got the same thing from the priest in this. It's like, you should listen to me because I am an authority. And everyone was. It was just this... Even though he was apparently rebelling, he was listening as if he was just some sort of, I need to absorb something from this guy, which I don't think somebody who was genuinely, having doubts about it or rebelling would do. It didn't feel right to me. It felt like he was too easily giving up to this authority figure. It was weird.
Yeah, there is a certain amount of repression involved because pastors, at least Protestant pastors, hold themselves up to a certain standard. They consider things sinful that normal society doesn't consider sinful, like obviously sexual aspects of life, like fantasizing about other women, lusting, viewing pornography, things that are completely natural and normal. They consider sinful, so there's a lot of repression that goes on. But also in the intellectual sphere, there are certain things that, because of their educational training in seminaries, they know to be the case, but that they'll never share with their congregation. Like, they know some of the historical inaccuracies and historical problems with the biblical text and stuff like that, but they won't share that with their congregation. So there's things they know that they're saying is untrue in most cases, because most seminaries do teach some real scholarship that casts some doubt on what they're telling in a devotional aspect to their flock.
Why do you think they specifically choose rock? They went into it a few times in the film and talked about how it promoted certain things like sexuality and God knows what else. But really there seems to be maybe something, or it seemed to me as if that wasn't really the primary motive. There was something else behind it. Perhaps it was the fact that at the very beginning we saw that it made them lose control, a certain type of authority over their child or over other people within that particular community who then wouldn't show up to church because they realized that there was more to life than just what the Bible or God knows what else was actually teaching them. Mm-hmm. So it seemed to be more to me about at least control than about the sins that they were claiming that it caused people to do or caused people to think about. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I've actually researched the whole anti-rock movement starting from the 50s onward. It reached its peak during the Satanic Panic of the 1980s in America, and it lasted all the way on through to the late 90s. It's died down quite a bit, but the threat they felt from rock music was pretty much what you said. It was a loss of control over the culture. They had their sacred music, their hymns, and various liturgical songs that in many ways they felt to be just as important as the biblical texts that they based their life on. They felt it really represented to a lot of churches the emotional aspect of their religious life, because they felt really deep and powerful emotions singing the hymns and devotional songs that they sang. It gave them like almost a spiritual experience. And when secular rock music came into its own and drew the attention of all these youths, they felt that it was an opposite influence, a satanic influence, because they didn't understand the music. It was foreign to them, the older generation of Christians. And so, because they put so much emotional weight onto their music, they felt that this music that they had no experience or familiarity with was other and alien and therefore satanic. So that's part of the psychology behind the hatred of rock music.
I can understand it in part from my own experience of when I was growing up, because my mum didn't like us listening to anything apart from the classical music that she played. And I used to hide a little radio that my grandma bought me under my pillow and listen to it on the lowest possible volume through the pillow. And even then, my mum used to be able to hear it from the kitchen, because I used to sleep in the downstairs room at the front, and she would sleep in the kitchen, and I would have it on late at night because I wanted to listen to a little bit of what she called tingle-tangle music. And I used to listen to it through that pillow, and she still used to hear it in the other room and come through, angry face, like, "Oh, what are you doing? You shouldn't be listening to this," in her German way. She was absolutely furious about it. She didn't like me. I don't know whether that had anything to do with religion, though. I don't know. I haven't really spoken to her about it. But there was a real sort of fighting against music that was kind of pop music. Anything that was popular was not allowed, which was quite strange. And that only really changed after I moved out, and my little brother and sister didn't really have the same kind of limitations. So yeah, I can kind of understand it from the so-called protagonist in this film's point of view, if he were being genuine.
Getting back to this movie, going through our list of characters, we've introduced Jeff Sims, the protagonist, and Milton Mamet, the youth pastor. And then there's Jeff's girlfriend, Melissa. What do you guys think of Melissa? She's not the kind of woman that, she's not portrayed in the best possible light.
No, she's kind of portrayed as manipulative-ish. I don't know. She was pretty nondescript. I don't remember that much about her. What about you, Kitch?
I just remember just thinking, why is she with him in the first place? My entire questioning behind her character is like, when she left the first time, I was thinking, oh, great. That's good for her. Like, clearly this person is going off the deep end and she should get the hell out of Dodge.
This is a really good point, because this is something I don't understand about Melissa and also Jeff's friend Marty. Melissa and Marty are not religious characters. They're pretty secular and worldly. And in fact, they have not so nice things to say about Christianity. They're pretty critical of it. And yet, from the beginning of the movie onwards, they attend church regularly. Mm-hmm. And in one of the opening scenes, Jeff is with Melissa and Marty in church. And the preacher is preaching about how we need to commit our whole lives to Christ, every aspect of our lives, including our music. And Marty's sitting there with Jeff and Melissa, and he says under his breath, all these evangelists are all the same. They're always telling us to do these things we don't want to do. Like last time it was, we got to cut our hair. And he was all griping and not happy. And then Melissa speaks up and says, if it wasn't for the party afterwards, I wouldn't even be here. Why do they need to be in church together in order to go to a party afterwards together?
Do you think it was just because they were kids and their parents kind of forced them to go to church? That's what I got out of it anyway.
I think so, because I think Marty said something about his dad forcing him to go to church.
Yeah.
But there's something off about it.
I
don't know,
get
maybe
that because it was. I think it was trying to be a kind of a representation of an atheist, or they were being portrayed as a representation of an atheist, but quite a hollow one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were kind of relying on this idea that, atheists might say they don't believe, but they still do all the things that we do, and they just say that they don't. They're just trying to rebel. So I think that's the picture it was trying to paint, as far as I could discern anyway.
I was thinking they were more aiming at people who said they believe, but don't go off and go to church or do any things. They're kind of like the, what's the phrase, Laxiday believers? Just people who say, whatever. I don't know the actual the proper term, but
but cafeteria Christian.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of.
So do you think they had like practicing people, evangelicals, and then the atheists? Well, that's
maybe. I mean, Melissa is with Jeff, a real serious Christian, so that might have something to do with why she goes to church. Maybe she's a nominal cafeteria Christian. Maybe she's an atheist. Marty's probably supposed to represent the typical unbeliever.
Yeah. I don't think she's an atheist, mainly because I don't think this film would do an atheist that subtle. Like if she was an atheist, she would be in the vampire stuff and the big blazing day and mascara and all that.
It feels like the entire thing is done really softly. So the parents are like really softly, apart from the dad, who we'll, I'm sure, talk about later, who comes across fucking creepy as fuck. But I mean, the rest of it is all sort of, everything's lovely, blah blah blah. That pastor as well, he was all sort of, I just want to help you. I just want to give you advice, and it was all sort of la-di-da.
Kind of goes out the window at the end, though, with that big speech at the end.
The evangelical is the only extreme in it, really, isn't it? That's the only one that kind of stands out, and that was kind of a moral thing. So it's just like, look, this is the only powerful position to take.
So about that pastor, Jeff's mom calls him on her phone, her rotary phone, of course, to tell him that Jeff is acting up and, oh my god, he's 16 years old and he won't listen to me. What a concept. He won't obey me. And so she asks him to talk to him.
Was she strict enough, do you think, to have to go to those sorts of lengths of asking like a stranger to do things for her?
She wasn't strict at all. The strict person in this family is the dad, which we'll get to later because there's some bits of dialogue that imply that Jeff's dad may be kind of psychotic and maybe even physically abusive, but we'll get to that in due course. Jeff's dad is off on a business trip, and he's not going to be in the best of moods when he gets home because he didn't get the promotion. And that comes up in another phone conversation between him and his wife. Like, oh, honey, did you get the promotion? And, no, honey.
Yeah, he went, no, I was too busy fucking 17-year-old rent boys in the hotel room and I forgot to go to the meeting.
That's the vibe.
What version did you get? That sounds like a much more awesome version. At least there's a little...
No, sorry, that was in the news recently. Ignore me, carry on. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, subtext. That wasn't in the movie. It was just subtext.
Yeah.
Anyway, she calls Jeff's youth pastor, Milton Mamet, and says, he's not listening to me and he's not obeying me. Can you talk to him? Later that night at church, Jeff stays later than everybody else to help the pastor clean up. And the pastor tells Jeff, hey, your mom called me and told me that you're acting up. And he says, I'm not going to preach at you, but... And then he proceeds to preach to him for about 5 minutes about verses in Romans and Galatians and what the fuck ever else. Mm-hmm. And says, okay, I'll give you a challenge. And the nature of this challenge is he has to refrain from listening to any rock music for 2 whole weeks. And he has to research what other moralistic Christian writers are saying about rock music. And at the end of that 2 weeks, he has to come to his own decision about what he thinks about rock music.
He also gives him some alternative music, doesn't he? But I didn't hear the alternative music. I didn't know what that was. Oh, hey, Buck.
How's everyone?
Not too bad. You good, mate?
It's just super.
Yay, Buck showed up.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to clean all about. I just sort of I was at the gym and cleaning the house. I just totally slipped
Have
my
you
mind.
watched the film?
I've watched the film this time. It is...
Oh, brilliant.
Jesus!
Okay, so let's bring Buck up to speed. We actually didn't talk too much about this movie yet, so you didn't miss too much. But we're up to the part now where Jeff is at the church at night with his youth pastor, whom we're calling Milton Mamet because I think that he looks a bit too much like Milton Mamet from The Walking Dead. So that's the
Never
name
watched that show.
that's the name I associate with him. And the youth pastor has just given him the challenge of not listening to any rock music for 2 weeks and then coming to his own decision about the nature of rock music. That's where we're at. And we also talked about, of course, the silliness of Jeff's mother calling his father and saying, he's 16 years old and he won't listen to me. What do I do?
Because he's a total fucking square. And it's like... But so do you just want to just jump back in then, or
Sure, I was just asking before about the music. The pastor said, or the youth worker, or whatever his name is, he said that he had some alternative music. Did we ever hear that throughout the entire film?
Yes. Oh, yes, we did.
It was largely classical music.
Was it?
Well, it's classical and hymns, and actually there's a nice little subtle message that they give off with the music choice, but we'll get to that later.
Okay.
But yeah, there is a scene where we do get to hear snippets of what the youth pastor gave him.
Jesus, I hope it wasn't Psalms for his sake, otherwise we've gone fucking crazy. It's no wonder he went all nuts at the end.
Yeah. It was a Nickelback CD.
Okay, so he gives him this challenge. Jeff agrees to it. Okay, I won't listen to any rock music for 2 whole weeks, and he's kind of down about it. Like, he gets back in his car to go home, switches the channel to the classical station, and he's like, oh man, 2 weeks if I live that long.
But I think there was an interesting thing that you sort of missed out from the pastor when he was telling them to do research, which was my favourite thing in the whole movie, which I really fucking hated this hour. But he goes, do your research, and he hands him the books that he needs to do the research out of, which is maybe slightly biasing the conclusions that he can come from.
We're pretty safe in assuming that he didn't give him books from the other side.
No, there was no Rolling Stones in there by any chance.
When he gave him the stack of books, he was like, here are some books about rock music from a Christian perspective. And so we can pretty much assume that, no, he's just getting one side of it here.
Okay.
And actually, bit of trivia, the book Jeff is reading at home in one of the next scenes is called The Big Beat, a Rock Blast. And that was written by a Protestant minister named Frank Garlock in the 1970s. And in this book, which is a real book, Frank Garlock complains that rock music represents like a regression or devolving of traditional established music norms to like this primitive state of non-music. So it's basically a book written by a grumpy old man ranting about how modern music is just noise.
My favourite thing in the whole wide world was this. There's this letter. It was written by a monk, and what he does is he's talking about how all the teenagers around him are only interested in fornication, listening to dancing, and they aren't interested in God or religion, and society's breaking down. And this was written in the 14th century, so it's just. I think there's actually even Egyptian hieroglyphs that talk about this, how everything's bad now, but it was much better when I was younger. It's this sort of idea that everyone has.
Oh, yeah.
It's called nostalgia.
Nostalgia.
It's definitely not new. And also, this Frank Garlock book that he's reading, in that book, he claims that rock music kills plants, and he also claims that listening to good music, meaning sacred hymns and traditional stuff like that, improves eyesight by 25%.
Wow.
So they didn't have the most reputable research advisor for this film. Let's just say that. Anyway, now that we're on that scene where he's reading that book in his house, this is also the scene where
his girlfriend comes back in again.
His girlfriend comes back, and they have some very room-like dialogue that happens when she comes in the door. That makes no sense and has no connection to what's happening anywhere else in the movie. His mother answers the door, and she's like, oh, hey, is Jeff here? And his mom's like, oh, yeah, he's planted himself in front of the TV again. And then she changes the subject completely, and she's like, what do you think about this birthstone that my grandma gave me? Oh, it's lovely. Oh, but she couldn't come visit me this week. She has to wait until next month or whatever. Nonsensical dialogue that has nothing to do with anything.
I think whoever made this movie thought it makes it seem more natural. Yeah, this is how normal people speak, but this is, you don't talk how normal people speak. I don't know. But again, she's always wanted a birthstone, and she's now got a birthstone, so that's pleasant for her, I suppose.
So she goes into the living room where Jeff is watching TV, and she's like, hey, Jeff, look at my engagement ring. He ignores her, and she says it again. Look at my engagement ring, Jeff. And he's like, that's not an engagement ring.
Oh, Jeff.
Which is...
Oh, Jeff.
What I take from that bit of dialogue is that she's trying to make him feel jealous by joking with him that it's an engagement ring.
Yeah, he doesn't twig onto that. No, he doesn't in any way.
I didn't twig onto that either, to be fair. I thought it was just a weird bit of dialogue again. I didn't understand what was going on. It just felt very weird to me. But
I didn't catch it on the first time.
First time? You watched it again?
I've only watched it. I couldn't watch it more than once myself.
Jesus.
But
I watched it
Nathan's
once.
watched it 3 times. Nathan's watched it 3 times.
Why?
I watched it once, and then I was like, wait, what? I can't remember anything of what just happened. I think my mind just blanked. Then I watched it the second time, and then just realised I've wasted 2 hours of my life.
There are about 5 occasions in this movie, because I have in the past watched a lot of vintage porn, where this seems like it's going to turn into porn. The scene where she drops the popcorn and she gets she gets down on her knees, and I'm thinking, this is porn. And then
you were just expecting the bucket chicka rocket chicka rocket.
Yeah, I was waiting for that. Grab the bump, John. and just bush everywhere.
George Bush, he's just popped out from behind the safe where he's watching it all.
Yeah.
I love that scene because first she says, because when Jeff says, yeah, your ring is pretty, it's all right. And she's like, man, you wouldn't know pretty if it slapped you in the face.
She should have slapped him at that point, right?
Or else they could have used that pretty ring line to move into the porn.
That would have been their transition opportunity that they missed.
That was the perfect transition.
This film is so bad that at this point only just hardcore pornography can save it.
Only hardcore BDSM pornography.
Oh dear.
So they start watching TV together, and interestingly, they're watching a violent program that involves shooting and some scuffling or something violent. And maybe they were trying to set up a sequel where they talk about the evils of violent TV, but Melissa says, oh no, look, Jeff, he's going to shoot her. And she knocks over a bowl of popcorn on him, as Buck mentioned. And then Jeff says one of the best lines in the whole movie. He says, what do you do for an encore?
Yeah. It's all very natural, normal dialogue.
It was another cue, that wasn't it, Buck? That was another cue. What do you do for an encore?
Yeah.
That popcorn out of your lap with my mouth.
Yeah. I think maybe the porn's just been edited out of this. As it might.
Maybe that's why the dad felt so kind of foreboding and harsh, because he was actually just the master coming in at the end, and then it all went shitting tits up after that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Jeff raises the bowl to her face and says, what does the Bible say about an eye for an eye? To which she replies, the Bible says nothing about bowl for bowl.
I mean, it was funny. I mean, I'm still laughing about that.
It was their attempt to be funny. But
yeah, I know. It was hilarious, though, Nathan. We've got to think about it, and you've got to think about the intricacies of that particular joke, because it's a biblical reference, but then it's also talking about popcorn. So it's just right. Carry on.
Just before its time.
After she says that, he says, "Forgiveness is one of my better virtues."
Again, slightly porny.
And this is where we get to the music that his youth pastor gave him. So he turns off the TV. And he turns on his vinyl player, and there's an instrumental hymn playing called no one ever cared for me like Jesus. That is actually pretty apropos music choice for this film, given how his girlfriend is going to end up treating him and how his friends will end up treating him later on, and how he'll treat them.
It's an odd music choice to play for your girlfriend. Like, you know, I know when my girlfriend was over, I instantly put in the best hits of Jesus Christ and the the Thundercats, or I don't know any Christian band names, so I'm just making them up as I go.
The Thundercats, right?
To be fair though, it's not too far off what Leia sung when she was in prison, in Spaceballs, when it wasn't actually Leia. Do you remember that? Where she goes, "Nobody knows the trouble I feel. Nobody knows but Jesus."
Who sang that song?
I don't know.
I'll have to look that up.
Nobody knows my sorrow. I know the singing frog from all it's the talking frog from all the Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Oh, I don't remember a frog.
The frog that would speak and dance when one character was looking at it, but then when anybody else looked at it, it went back to being a normal frog.
I don't remember him at all. Is this some Bugs Bunny porn you've been watching?
No,
I know.
This is legitimate.
It wasn't. It's in Looney Tunes, but it wasn't Bugs Bunny. It was. I know the skit. I know it. Just I'll Google it.
Oh, okay. What does the frog have to do with this anyway? Just out of interest, because
he used to sing that. Nobody knows the trouble I see. This is a total. This is a connection of a connection of a connection. It's.
This is how we.
It actually has a. He actually has a character name. It's Michigan J Frog.
Michigan J Frog.
Looney Tunes, superb. That's what I'm just saying. The matter.
It's far more funnier than this movie.
Oh yeah.
Jesus, that's not as good as I was saying.
But guys, we have to get back to it, as painful as it is.
Yeah. So, what happens next is
basketball court.
Basketball court?
I think they're on the basketball court next, are they?
Oh no. Before that happens, Melissa asks him about getting the concert tickets, and Jeff says, "I can't go. I made this deal with my youth pastor that I won't listen to rock music for 2 weeks." And she's pissed off about it and storms off and says, "Well, if you won't go to the concert with me, maybe Dennis will go with me." And
who we never get to see or hear from again. Dennis, I mean. Who is this Dennis? I'd like to follow him in this picture. Sounds like he's going to get the girl.
He's a menace.
Dennis sounds like a pretty cool guy. Like everyone in this movie is fairly reasonable. He turns into a bit of an asshole, but again, like as far as assholes go, he's not the worst asshole.
He's just indoctrinated. That's all.
Yeah,
it's not completely his fault.
I blame the parents.
Moving on to the next scene, which I guess Buck said was the basketball court,
which also had an opportunity to turn into porn.
What kind of porn?
Well, gay basketball porn. But there were a couple of incidences where like a shirt could have come off. I've just got my notes for the entire thing are basketball court - porn. That's everything I have written on the basketball scene.
He's talking to his friend Marty. Jeff's personality kind of changes at this point. Like, he talks differently with Marty than he does with everybody else. He talks like he's trying to be cool and hip. He's like, "Hey man, you know, I'm starting to believe what these preachers are saying. You know what I'm saying, man?" And he's trying to ease his friend Marty into what he's about to tell him about, "You're sinful and this rock music you're listening to is evil." And he's trying to ease him into that nicely. Tells Marty, "You're the one who's always saying you want to see it to believe it, so why don't you come to my house and see what I'm talking about with this music?"
That is very pornographic. I'm sorry, I couldn't let that go. You're always saying you want to see it. Come to my house and take a look, big boy. Oh my god.
They go to Jeff's house, and Jeff is showing him his record collection. And he's like,
"Yes, record collection."
Record collection. And they do.
I'm sorry, I have a fever. I'm partially delirious.
To be fair, they do talk about sex, so you're not too far off. They're in the room together, and Jeff is like, "Hey Marty, have you noticed how many of these songs and albums talk about sex?"
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he starts putting his arm around him, and he puts his hand on his trousers and he goes, right, you notice how it's also sexual? Do you like it? Are you lying on my bed now? Oh, yeah. You like my record collection? They've got holes in the middle of them. Oh, yeah.
Pretty much. I have nothing to add to
God.
that.
I should go to fucking bed, honestly. Oh.
Except to say that Marty's weirded out by Jeff. He says, he really is, because his best friend is talking about songs that have sex in them.
He was getting vibes, big time.
Yeah, definitely getting vibes. He leaves pretty quickly,
God.
and as he leaves, he picks up a couple of Jeff's albums, and he's like, hey, if you're going to get rid of these, why don't you throw them my way, huh? And then he storms off, which is a reasonable request, I guess.
Yeah.
By the sounds of it, he does have some pretty good music.
So he did the old days version of "Can I Have Your Stuff," and then left.
Yep, exactly.
Classic.
So the movie goes on to document Jeff's research that he does by going to the mall, going to the record store, and he's carrying like a clipboard and notebook with him. And he wants to interview like the manager of the record store, and he wants to interview random shoppers who are shopping there about their music tastes. And he goes through and copies down the songs off of the bands that have been most popular the past couple years. And I don't know, maybe this is a preliminary stage of his research, but what's interesting is that because of this deal he made with his youth pastor, he can't actually listen to any of the music he's researching.
Yeah, but just kind of key. It's like doing a movie review on a movie that you actually haven't watched, or doing a book review on a genre that you actually have no idea about reading the book.
And this is actually a key bit of social commentary that the writers put in without realizing it. Or maybe they did, I don't know, but all these anti-rock Christians in the 1970s and 80s, they didn't listen to any of the stuff that they wrote about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that at that period as well, they're going through the banning of comic books and similar sorts of, so people who had never read a comic book in their life were making massive claims about what was in them. I think the famous one was that Superman represented Nietzsche's Übermensch. The perfect. It's like, no, this was a series about a social science at one stage, where it wasn't not serious, but it was considered serious. So these people have a small rough idea. You take it. So they mentioned "Start Me Up," so the Rolling Stones song. And they're talking about that, which is a song about sex. The whole thing is about you start me up, you turn me on, basically, which is a fucking tune. But so there's no real care for it, or nobody listens to it. It's about sex, therefore it is bad. That's it.
Well, we'll get into the list of songs that they mentioned later on near the end, and we'll find out that none of the songs they mention have anything to do with what they think it means. So there's another key scene that happens right around this time. When he's doing his research at the mall, he's leaving and he passes like an audio store, and this whole time there's like a voiceover going on. So like he's describing to his youth pastor what he's been doing for his research, and while this footage is playing over it of what he's actually doing, he passed by the audio store with the music playing, and he says, "I just stopped there and listened without realizing what I was doing. The beat just grabbed me. I couldn't get the music out of my mind until I got home and played one of the tapes you gave me. Just weird being controlled like that." And this is something we brought up early in this show before you came on, was the theme of evil possession via rock music. Because Jeff, in the absence of rock, when he's not listening to it, seems like, like you said, a square kind of...
No, even with rock music, he's a total fucking square. They're all fucking squares. I mean, like, he's like, his parents are like, "Oh, he's being disobedient." He's like, first of all, he isn't. Is he sick? When he's 16 in this?
Yeah.
He's like 35.
Well, the thing is, he does transform a little bit, because the movie implies that as soon as he listens to rock music, he changes from this good kid to like this rebellious jerk, because the opening scene of the movie is him going, "Mom, get off my back," and storming out of the house and almost getting into a car wreck, all because of his rock music. So there is this theme of rock music possessing or controlling him in a malevolent way, like some kind of malevolent spirit taking hold of him. And that'll come up again at the end as well. So after he is done describing this research he's doing, it cuts back to the youth pastor and Jeff talking in the church. And at this point comes the big reveal that Jeff's youth pastor used to be a drummer in his older brother's rock band before getting saved.
This movie is so fucking boring. It was just so boring. And I chose Jesus. I don't know. It's. I genuinely know people like this. They're like saved people, but they're like saved at one moment, and the next moment they're drinking and riding and doing everything else, and then the next time you see them, they're saved again, and they're very respectable and very, looking down their nose at you, not believing this here. So it's sort of like, it's this non-thing, the music that you listen to, and it's, they want to make the biggest fucking deal out of it possible.
Well, that Sunday Christian that you're describing is exactly what this movie is railing against, because there's that scene near the end where Jeff says, "I don't want to be just a Sunday Christian. I want people to look at me and think that I'm different." So it clearly advocates for Christians to take a very strong stance and become culture warriors in such a way that they're completely set apart from culture and society in a really extreme way.
Did anyone get terrorism vibes from that at all? Like he wanted to be the next Anders Behring Breivik?
In fairness, 10 years after that take place, you see it happen.
Yeah, I know. It's like, it reminds me of that film. Have you ever seen the film Rampage?
No.
Watch the film Rampage. It's about a guy who develops a plan to kind of screw up his local neighborhood in this big sort of terrorist attack. And I think that's where this kid will end up one day.
Well, he would have already ended up there because...
this is true, yeah, because he's going to be like 60-odd now, isn't he?
16 in 1982. Yeah, that makes
Okay, fair enough. Okay, he's not that old then.
50-something.
Yeah, there's still time. Rampage film is made by a notoriously bad... he's the creator of notoriously bad films, if you have a look at the one. I think it's 2009 Rampage.
Oh, is it the guy who just does video game movies, is he?
He does a lot of video game films, yeah.
That's him there, yeah.
Uwe Boll.
Yeah.
Oh, U-Ball.
Yeah, if you watch Rampage, I can't say I enjoyed the film, but I found it interesting. I found it interesting to watch. It's one of those films that's kind of cathartic release of some really, really dark bits of your personality. So, it's...
I think that pretty much describes most of U-Ball's work and why he has such an appeal.
Yeah. I mean, it's done pretty well. I think there's been a couple of other ones afterwards. I think there's Rampage Capital Punishment and Rampage President Down, which I haven't watched. I haven't watched the third one.
Is that anything like the Purge movies?
Kind of yes and no. They don't really have the thing about Uwe Boll films, or these particular ones anyway, is that they don't really have much of a sort of a musical score to them. They're pretty subtle. So when somebody does something bad, there's no fanfare about it. They just do it. It's just there, and it just happens. And there's no kind of... It's like real life in that sense, which makes them a little bit more shocking. There's another one called Assault on Wall Street, where a guy's kind of been fired from his job and everything's gone tits up. And I think his wife's dying or something like that. And then they won't help him, so he just goes mental and shoots the place up. And it's that kind of gone postal. Which was another one of his
famous movies. He done Postal. Yeah.
Did he do Postal?
Which all these movies much more interesting than what it is we're watching.
Yeah. Shit, it's so easy to get distracted, isn't it? God damn. Right, let's get back on track. Where were we?
We were at the part where Milton Mamet reveals that he used to be a rock star. And Jeff's like, "Oh, why didn't you tell me this before?" And the youth pastor tells him, "Well, then I would have felt like I was forcing your hand."
Whereas what he meant to say was, "I've just made it up to make it look as if I've escaped."
I bet he really rock star, and his life was none but coke and 15-year-old, what do they call them again?
Groupies?
Groupies. 15-year-old groupies. And that was his fucking life. And he left it all. Yeah.
So he's had all the fun. He's had all the fun, and he wants to deny it as this to this kid.
Yeah, pretty
as
much.
some kind of punishment. Now that he's still doing it, but he's able to get away with it because he's pretending to be a priest.
The reason he became a Christian is because his band failed, and he was searching for meaning in his life. And so he found Jesus, but he's been unfulfilled since then, and religion hasn't fulfilled him, so he's become this sad man who just tries to kill the joy in other people. He sees this teenage kid, Jeff, who's interested in rock music, and he's not going to let him have any of the fun, because he was disappointed earlier in his life.
Yeah.
He's
Maybe
just
that's
a
what
bitter,
he
twisted old bastard.
Remember that scene in the beginning when, after the church service gets over, and Marty and Melissa run up to Jeff, and they're like, "Hey, come on, Jeff, you gotta listen to this." And Milton is staring after them with this creepy look on his face, like, what are they doing? It looks like they're going off to have fun.
Oh, I wish I was with them. I'm not that age anymore. They won't accept me into their circle unless I teach them that rock is evil.
Yeah.
What's the Christian version of Rohypnol?
The Christian version of what?
Rohypnol. Jesus juice. Do you reckon, holy water has actually got something in it, that makes people receptive to priest penis?
Boring Jesus movie. What else happened there?
To
Well,
make
kidding
this
was
movie
cool. By doing
interesting.
it, could we pretend
Like,
we watched an entirely different movie? Just make up our own plot?
Oh yeah, well you saw what I just did earlier with trying to interpret the youth pastor's motivations.
No,
You think the youth pastor is actually Dr. Fibes?
That's a really good point, but he doesn't look like Vincent Price, so...
No, he doesn't. He's just got a really good disguise this time.
Okay, so there's a really complex scene that comes up next, and it might take a little bit of deconstruction. The party scene. A lot is going on with this. So, a bit of background, his girlfriend calls him while he's at work. He works as a fry cook, and she tells him, "Hey, Marty's having a party tonight." And it turns out that she's really kind of setting him up, because Marty doesn't want him there, but, Melissa talked him into letting him show up or something. So he shows up, and damn it if Marty doesn't start playing the rock music as soon as he shows up. Jeff throws a fit and says, "What's the big idea playing this nonsense when you knew I was going to be here?" And there's this big blow-up that's kind of reminiscent of the final throwdown scene in the room, where everything goes to shit with the relationship.
It reminded me a lot of the throwdown scene in Revenge of the Sith, where Obi-Wan cuts all Anakin's limbs off. I'm making up my own movie from here on in. My notes have ended. So, so yeah, he murdered him.
Yeah, his dad came home and he went, "Fuck, I don't need to deal with that little shit anymore." And then, the family rejoiced. They didn't bury him; they just burnt him in a bonfire, and that was it.
What's interesting is that Jeff actually fails the challenge that he agreed to at this point, because he storms out of the house, gets back in his car, drives to his house where his mom is, goes up to his room, and turns up his rock music full blast.
What was the point of that? He was at a party that was playing the rock music, and he could have just stayed there and enjoyed himself. But then he goes home and he gets stressed out, and then he plays the music by himself. Why?
He's a self-entitled little piece of shit, really, from that one scene where he goes mental because somebody started playing rock music. Well, why did you invite me if you know they're going to be playing it? I didn't force you to come along, you little shit. You can come or go. Oh, apologies for inviting you to this nice party, you little fucking gimp.
Exactly. As he's leaving the party, he's like, "It's not going to blow over now. It's not going to blow over ever." And he goes home, and at that point, as soon as he gets home, it does blow over, because he plays his music. And his mom melts down, slaps him in the face.
Best part of the movie.
And this is the part where we get a glimpse of what his dad is like. After she slaps him, she's like, "Just wait until your father gets home and I tell him."
Yeah, and then there's a little cut sideways to looking at his arm and seeing all the cigarette holes that have been in there from previous times.
And this film got dark all of a sudden.
There is a dark undertone, at least.
Yeah.
And so he goes off on his mom about her soap operas, which he says are basically just sex with commercials. And he says, "Go ahead and tell Dad, I don't care." He storms out of the house for the second time. Second house he stormed out of that night. And then he just kind of drives around aimlessly, and we get like this really awkwardly done montage of previous scenes. Lines of dialogue just kind of thrown together, kind of like a recap of everything that's been stressing him out over the last 45 minutes of the movie. He parks his car in this really remote area, kind of outside the city, and he starts talking to his imaginary friend.
Start to hear answers back saying, burn them all, Jeff.
Burn them all.
And then he goes, takes out the petrol can and a load of bottles that he's had prepared back there. And he starts filling them up and tearing chunks of tissue and stuff, stuffing them in the top of the bottles before he drives back to town and burns the whole fucking place down.
He tells Jesus, you know what, Jesus, I can't fight everybody.
Jesus told me.
Yeah,
it's like Platoon, wasn't it? It was awesome.
A little bit, yeah. He ends up telling Jesus, okay, you know, I do want to glorify you in every aspect of my life, including my music. So after he tells Jesus that, he drives back to the party and basically breaks up with Melissa and says, if you can't respect my beliefs, then I guess I just have to go and find new friends. And then he leaves.
Yeah.
Not before not returning with a double-barreled shotgun, a bottle of liquor.
We all want this to go south so fast, don't we? Oh my god.
Okay, we'll come up with more ways to come up with an alternative, interpretive, different way of viewing this movie.
How long before Hollywood goes through everything and eventually gives this movie a gritty reboot?
A gritty reboot I would like to see, actually. I would like to see it with violence, with pornography, and God knows what else in it. You know, the real deal. Like with, you know, Battlestar Galactica. I was having a conversation about this the other day. The original BSG was a Mormon tale. And the second one is a Mormon tale as well, but it's been adapted so it's more violent, it's more gritty, it's more real. The ending still made sure that I'm never going to watch it again because I hate the idea that it was, oh, God did it, you wouldn't understand. After all that good shit. And maybe the next bit of BSG will actually have a decent ending and have so much violence and grit. And maybe this film, when it comes on again, will have some actual rock music in it.
Maybe I'll rewrite it and submit it.
Maybe we should actually just film it. Maybe we should all just get together and make a better
That would be
version.
awesome.
Let's do that shit. But we will have to make it exciting, though. That's the thing.
To wrap this discussion up, there's a really important bit at the end, and that is Jeff's climactic speech at the end. And this is where the heavy-handedness of the movie really comes down strong with its preaching and its message. There's a few actually really good lines in here, though. The possession theme comes up again. He says, man, I can just turn up that old stereo and the beat just drives away my bad mood. Pretty soon I'm really getting into it, really moving with it, and all my problems are gone. But what about the spiritual part of me? He says, I know what some of you are thinking. Hey, I listen to rock music, but I can control it. And then he says, I don't think that's right. What's the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning or when you come home in the afternoon from school?
Have a wank.
We were all thinking it.
He's getting really thought policey at this point. Just walk into some record store that's playing a good get down beat. See what the music does to you. And then he talks about, hey, have you guys ever seen a rock concert on TV or been to one yourself? Look at what the music does to people. They're all en masse swaying and clapping and dancing and jumping to the beat. They were actually being controlled. And
at that point, I just face palmed so hard that I'm actually considering sending Cal the medical bill.
This is going back to that bit in, was it Revenge of the Sith again? Where he goes, I hate them all.
No, that was Attack of the Clones.
Oh, was it? Okay, shit.
When does he do that in Attack of the Clones?
When he's on Tatooine and his mother dies and Padme comes in.
That's another completely dysfunctional relationship in another movie.
Yeah, because he got caught in the friend zone and couldn't get out. At least that's the Arlnauts version of the prequels.
Yeah, my favourite telling of that story is that it's actually about a love triangle, and she's actually with Obi-Wan Kenobi. It makes a terrible, terrible story much more interesting.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. It's baby, baby, baby time. It's baby time. It's baby time.
Did you just have a stroke there?
In that alternative version of the prequels that we're both talking about, there's a subplot where Obi-Wan and Padme want to give their baby to C-3PO, Creepio as they call him, and Creepio starts singing this hilarious song about how it's baby time, and he's so excited to get this baby. You'd have to watch it. I can't reproduce it here, how awesome it is.
Was there anything else about this movie that was noteworthy, do you think?
One thing I didn't want to mention was he goes through a list of songs that he finds objectionable, and he gets absolutely everything about these songs completely wrong. So, for example, he says, listen to these titles. Listen to how many of them have something to do with Satanism or the occult. And he lists a bunch of songs, and I'll go through them right now. Sympathy for the Devil and Dancing with Mr. D by the Rolling Stones. Now, Sympathy for the Devil is a song that's being told through Satan's perspective, and he's talking about the horrors of history, and he's kind of taking responsibility for them. Dancing with Mr. D is not about the devil. Mr. D refers to death, so he gets that wrong. He mentions Dance with the Dragon by Jefferson Starship. That's not a reference to Satan. He's talking about the Chinese New Year dragon in that song.
It's not about drugs, no?
Might be, as it is Jefferson Starship. He mentions the song Evil Ways by Santana, but, of course, he completely fails to mention that the very first line of that song is, you've got to change your evil ways. They just found a song that said evil ways in it and said, oh, there's something objectionable. It has evil in the title.
I want to listen to these songs right now. That's a fucking tune.
These are actually some really good bands that they're introducing people to. The only good thing that could have come from this movie is back in the 80s when church groups were showing it, some of the kids in the church might write down some of the names of these bands and start checking them out, you know? Then he mentions a song by AC/DC called Hell Ain't a Bad Place to Be. Apparently they didn't listen to this song either because that song is actually referring not to a literal hell, it's actually referring to a relationship with a woman gone bad. He goes on, it gets even weirder and more bizarre from there because he starts talking about how this really vanilla light music is evil. He says Captain and Tennille have tried to change their image with songs like You Need a Woman Tonight and You've Never Done It Like That. This movie thinks Captain and Tennille is evil and satanic. That tells you all you need to know about their their research skills here.
Yep. Part of me thinks that they have listened to it, but they just don't really care. They're counting on the people listening to or watching the movie to not know that these songs aren't what they're saying they are.
The kind of people who'll eat some really nice chocolate and then just complain when they find out it's not organic.
They want to reach not only the youth who are listening to the hard stuff, they want to reach out to like the parents who are watching soap operas and listening to really light vanilla stuff as well. He goes on this rant about Barry Manilow, and here's a quote from the movie. Even Barry Manilow wrote in one of his hits, Could It Be Magic? Come into my arms and let me know the wonder of all of you. And then he says, yeah, and he's supposed to be mild. Oh my god. So they're going after the stuff that parents would listen to as well, and trying to make sure that everybody walks the straight and narrow, and there's no diverting into even any of this really vanilla stuff that nobody besides them would have any objection to.
And I think this is something that religion wants to do, and I think Islam does it much better than Christianity does, that it wants to control every aspect of your life, where something sort of harmless and sort of, you know, as music you listen to it, well, no, we want to control that. We don't want you having any sort of stimulus that we're not in some way in charge of. So, you know, you see a lot of like bizarre sort of things like this, and a lot of examples of it.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this before you came on the show, about the narrative of control, and I was talking earlier about how the pious and the faithful in various congregations across denominations consider hymns and sacred songs to be kind of the emotional side of their religious life, and so they get these really high emotional spiritual experiences singing these hymns. And so when they encounter new stuff that's foreign to them and raucous and completely unfamiliar to them that the kids are listening to, they automatically, psychologically go to this place where, well, because our sacred music has a lot of emotional weight for us, then this music that we don't know about and is weird and different to us it must have the opposite influence, and it must be satanic in nature. It's like they're projecting their own emotional weight and importance that they place on their music and putting it on the secular music.
Don't you also think it's quite ironic how they're so against sex, but then letting God inside of you and letting him come inside of you and all that kind of stuff is absolutely fine. You can be a whore for God, but you're not allowed to fuck around outside of marriage. It's just ridiculous.
I think part of that has to do with the veneration of God as your first love. I think that in itself is the clue, because they talk about God without realizing it in very sexual terms.
Very sexual terms, yeah.
as a South Park episode where Cartman's doing Christian music. So all he does is he takes pop songs and then puts God into it instead. I want to feel your salvation all over my face. That's good. So that's basically the movie, and they all agree that Jeff's a fucking square. His girlfriend, I'm going to presume, sort of gets bored of him after a while. Maybe he's only 16. He'll probably grow out of that phase. I was pretty religious when I was 16. Probably an atheist now.
Do you think it was worth watching at all? Do you think it shone any kind of light on the people who made it?
Yeah, I can't, because I'm so aware of. Do you know what this is very similar to? Do you know if the Satanic Panic stuff?
Oh yeah, it's very near and dear to my heart. I love researching the Satanic Panic. So entertaining.
It's very, very similar to that. In fact, this could have got a lot more mental. Which Queen song was it? And what you can hear in the noise is "It's fun to smoke marijuana."
Oh, that was Another One Bites the Dust.
Another One Bites the Dust. Yes.
I wrote an article about backward masking a while back on my blog. It's a fascinating topic, I think.
It's brilliant how people have been trolling people throughout history using whatever means possible to just fuck with people who are credulous to stuff like that. I mean, sometimes it backfires and you get times, like really bad times like the Dark Ages, where everyone just gets murdered as a result of it. But, you know, the rest of the time it's awesome.
Yeah, Dark Ages, absolutely no crack whatsoever. Bad time for everyone involved.
You know what this movie reminded me of? It's very similar quality-wise, and it came from the same era. There's a Mormon anti-coffee movie.
Anti-coffee?
It's a movie short. It's like 3 minutes long. It's like a skit. I'll post it in the chat here, but it's called A Cup of Coffee. It was made in 1980 by the Mormon Church, and I have our friend Natalie Newell to thank for pointing this out to me, that this thing exists.
Natalie, she's no friend of mine.
Well, she's adopting you, I hear, so...
So I hear. It was almost as if they were talking about heroin throughout this movie. It's like the script was wrote for heroin, and they've changed it like last minute to rock music.
Yeah. Do you think it was a five-step movie then?
A 5-step movie?
A 5-step movie for ridding your life from rock, or ridding rock from your life. You know how like you've got a 5-step program for alcoholics?
12-step.
Is it 12?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's 12. But this movie is more like a cold turkey program.
A cold turkey program.
I mean, at the end, he takes a vinyl record and smashes it. So you've just got to be done with it completely. No more like fucking around with the rock.
Do you know what? I can agree with that sentiment if you're talking about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Don't fuck about with him, big guy. He's going to be in the new Rampage movie. So wait a second, this movie wasn't talking about Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, no?
There's an interpretation.
Oh, I've completely missed the point. I've missed the point of this movie completely.
Maybe it was just talking about crack cocaine, because some people call them rocks.
Yeah, true.
It'd make his opening to his rant at the end of the movie a little bit more. It'd make that much more sense, because he starts off at, "What happened to people here are going to go off and get drunk or thinking about going shooting heroin?" And it's like, yes, because you know those two things are totally relatable. Shooting heroin while listening to music.
Yeah, I'd probably imagine most people shooting up heroin probably listening to music. But I'd like to see like a Christian anti-Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson movie where they warn against the dangers of the People's Champion. I'd watch that. If you can find that movie, I'll watch that, okay?
It would be more accurate than this, wouldn't it?
Do you think there is actually a point to the film that is actually quite poignant though, in the fact that if somebody can be controlled to the point of actually doing things that they don't want to do, as in if music is actually mind control to them, surely perhaps not listening to that music is probably a good thing, because they might end up like a sleeper agent of some sort, and all that will happen is somebody will play like the Cantina song from Star Trek and they'll murder people.
You know, I can't even give it that, because the movie implies that it's like an either or thing where you have to be controlled by something. They don't give you the option of free will in this movie. Either you're controlled by rock music or you're controlled by Jesus music. There's no like middle ground there. You've got to be controlled by something.
Rock. Yeah, I'm gonna go with the rock.
So you're stuck between rock and a hard cock.
So do you have any other thoughts, opinions, or anything to say on this masterpiece, this work of art?
Yeah, anybody?
I can't even think anymore.
I think the only value in it is it's a good bit of historical social commentary, because it opens up a window into the fundamentalist mindset. And for that, you can learn something if you look at it that way, as just a window into the psychology of the fundamentalist.
Out of interest, do Muslims do any kind of similar films to that at all? I would be very interested to see if there's any kind of Muslim fundamentalist films. Oh no, wait a minute. There are.
You are aware of the Hamas. What was it? It's like Hamas Sesame Street. What was it like? There's like a Hamas children's program. Oh God, there they are there. Oh Jesus, they're so depressing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just realised my folly there. We don't want to be watching those or commenting on them because we will feel incredibly depressed afterwards. There is nothing funny about most of those films. We'll leave them be.
Well, what do you say we call this podcast to an end? And thank you all for listening. If you like our show, give us a review on iTunes or whatever other platform you're listening to us on. Big shout out to our 2 patrons that we have, Microbloganism and Josh from the Society for the Advancement of Science. Thank you both for your support very much. And if anybody else would like to support us with a $5 per episode or more donation, we have a Patreon set up for that purpose. Buck, where can people find you if they want to follow you?
Get me on Twitter. I have to go. I can never remember if my tweet handle is that Buck Mulligan or.
I do believe it's at that Buck guy. I think I remember better than you.
That Buck, yeah. Oh, for fuck's sake, just work. At that Buck, yeah. Follow me on Twitter, yeah. And if you want, I'll send you a picture of some of the detritus about my living room as a wee thank you for following me.
Yep. All right. Thank you all for joining us, and I'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.
any opening thoughts on this movie from either of you?
Well, I haven't listened to any rock and roll since, so I think it's done its job.
It's a just to summarize this movie, it's a depressing look at how over-religious parents push a young man against the thing he loves, turning him into a horrible, just unlikable, awful person who just becomes socially inept, destroys his social life, and destroys any semblance of a personality he has. It's truly a brilliant anti-religion film.
Yeah, I'd say that was pretty good synopsis, actually. Yeah.
Yep, that pretty much sums it all up in a
Right,
nice
that's
little
it then.
package.
Brilliant. Good job, guys.
I think it was the Cinema Snob, or it might have been someone else, I can't remember, who made the comment that if you watch this movie in reverse, it's about fundamentalist, pious Christian kid who becomes a hardcore rock fanatic.
Well, hardcore is a bit much, but it's not really hardcore because he wasn't really that bad going into it. But then again, This is a Christian propaganda film, so...
Well, the first scene of this movie has Jeff Sims, the name of the Christian teenager who's the main character, barging out of his house after his mom yells at him and saying, "Mom, get off my back!" because of his rock music. And then he drives away and almost gets in a car accident.
He wasn't a mosher, though, was he? I mean, he wasn't like... He was listening to death metal and, all that kind of stuff. He wasn't hardcore. He was just a bit of a petulant teenager, really, at the start, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was actually listening to some pretty tame stuff throughout.
Yeah. I think that was because maybe the people who made the film, they didn't want themselves to listen to the hardcore stuff. Because they feared that perhaps Satan would get them during the making of the film, so they had to use the slightly less, erotic and sexually deviant versions of what was around at the time, perhaps.
I actually did a search for when the different bits of music were playing in certain scenes. I transcribed down the lyrics that were playing and tried to search for it online to see what songs they were using.
Yeah.
Can't walk on the water. Got a bone chest.
And nothing came up at all. So the rock music in this movie is completely made up.
I was thinking they had to use royalty-free music because you can see
various liturgical songs that in many ways they felt to be just as important as the biblical texts that they based their life on. They felt it really represented to a lot of churches the emotional aspect of their religious life because they felt really deep and powerful emotions singing the hymns and devotional songs that they sang. It gave them almost a spiritual experience. And when secular rock music came into its own and drew the attention of all these youths, they felt that it was an opposite influence, a satanic influence, because they didn't understand the music. It was foreign to them, the older generation of Christians. And so because they put so much emotional weight onto their music, they felt that this music that they had no experience or familiarity with was other and alien and therefore satanic. So that's part of the psychology behind the hatred of rock music.
I can understand it in part from my own experience of when I was growing up, because my mum didn't like us listening to anything apart from the classical music that she played. And I used to hide a little radio that my grandma bought me under my pillow and listen to it on the lowest possible volume through the pillow. And even then, my mum used to be able to hear it from the kitchen, because I used to sleep in the downstairs room at the front, and she would sleep in the kitchen, and I would have it on late at night because I wanted to listen to a little bit of what she called tingle tangle music. And I used to listen to it through that pillow, and she still used to hear it in the other room and come through, angry face, like, "Oh, what are you doing? You shouldn't be listening to this," in her German way. She was absolutely furious about it. She didn't like me. I don't know whether that had anything to do with religion, though. I don't know. I haven't really spoken to her about it. But there was a real sort of fighting against music that was kind of pop music. Anything that was popular was not allowed, which is quite strange. And that only really changed after I moved out, and my little brother and sister didn't really have the same kind of limitations. So yeah, I can kind of understand it from the so-called protagonist in this film's point of view, if he were being genuine.
getting back to this movie, going through our list of characters, we've introduced Jeff Sims, the protagonist, and Milton Mamet, the youth pastor. And then there's Jeff's girlfriend, Melissa. What do you guys think of Melissa? She's
In one of the scenes, the album covers have their names blacked out.
Satan must have done that, though.
It's a much better explanation than what I was thinking, which was maybe the directors just thought that if they actually played some actual hardcore heavy metal, they might actually lose some of their followers to, good music.
Maybe.
Yeah. Well, there was a scene in the record store in the mall when he was going through and doing his quote-unquote research, and you could see a cover of a Bob Seger album, but that's about it. But let's go through this scene by scene in League of Nerds style. As we said, the movie tells the story of a Christian teenager named Jeff Sims, who's dealing with some interpersonal conflicts in his life thanks to his love of rock music. The beginning bits of the movie imply that normally, in the absence of rock music, he's this good, moral, upstanding kind of kid, but that whenever he listens to rock, he suddenly transforms into a rebellious jerk, as if some sinister influence is taking him over. And actually, this theme is developed further. Other characters in this movie, Jim Owen, the youth pastor, gives off a really creepy vibe, I think, and I'm just going to refer to him as Milton Mamet from The Walking Dead. He bears a striking resemblance to him, and every time I see him, that's who I think of.
Do you find all pastors creepy now that you've left the faith? Because I find quite a lot of pastors, or over here priests, creepy anyway. I get that vibe from most of them these days.
I actually don't know a lot of preachers currently, but yeah, when I see them like in a video or in an audio recording or something, yeah, I do get at least a little bit of that vibe.
I was a Catholic, so...
It takes a certain kind of person, doesn't it, to do something like that? And I can remember still when I went to Leona's dad's funeral. He died, unfortunately, shortly after we met. Sorry to give the show on a downer already, but
That's all right.
We went round to the church and the funeral, and it was just this real authoritarian kind of... And I got the same thing from the priest in this. It's like, you should listen to me because I am an authority. And everyone was. It was just this... Even though he was apparently rebelling, he was listening as if he was just some sort of, I need to absorb something from this guy, which I don't think somebody who was genuinely, having doubts about it or rebelling would do. It didn't feel right to me.
Have any of you ever seen a rock concert on TV? Or maybe even been to one personally? How did the audience react to the music? Well, did they just sit quietly in their seats and listen? Man, I sure wouldn't. No, they were all en masse, swaying and clapping and dancing and jumping to the beat. They were actually being controlled.
I want to say to everyone here today, it's true. We're gonna have a good time. We're gonna have a good time. We're gonna have a good
Hello and welcome to Trolling with Logic, where we bring the hammer down on pseudoscience, ignorance, and unreason on a bi-weekly basis. I'm your host, Nathan, and with me today is Jen and Kitch. How you guys doing?
Doing well. I've got my coffee with my Irish cream, so I'm ready to do this.
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I've got some pizza here. Yes, sorted. Whatever. Let's go for it. Let's hit this shit.
Yeah, Buck Mulligan was meant to be here, but he hasn't shown up. Maybe he'll show up later in this episode. Who knows?
Yeah, his name is Buck, and he likes to fuck off.
Well, we are doing a movie review today, which we meant to do last episode, and Buck was here for that, and we talked about Alien Contact, which was an off-the-cuff thing because he hadn't watched what we're watching or talking about today. So the movie we all watched is called Rock, It's Your Decision. This movie was made in 1982, and it's one of those Christian propaganda movies that lash out at certain aspects of society and culture. In this case, the boogeyman is rock music. This is basically the reefer madness of anti-rock propaganda. And yes, anti-rock films are a genre in Christian filmmaking. There have been several documentaries made by Christian groups that denounce rock music in the strongest possible terms, the most entertaining of which is probably Eric Holmberg's Hell's Bells, The Dangers of Rock and Roll, which came out 7 years after this one did. Anyway, the movie that we're reviewing today actually tells a story with actors and a narrative script.
It felt like he was too easily giving up this to this authority figure. It was weird.
Yeah, there is a certain amount of repression involved because pastors, at least Protestant pastors, hold themselves up to a certain standard. They consider things sinful that normal society doesn't consider sinful, like obviously sexual aspects of life, like fantasizing about other women, lusting, viewing pornography, things that are completely natural and normal. They consider sinful, so there's a lot of repression that goes on. But also in the intellectual sphere, there are certain things that, because of their educational training in seminaries, they know to be the case, but that they'll never share with their congregation. Like, they know some of the historical inaccuracies and historical problems with the biblical text and stuff like that, but they won't share that with their congregation. So there's things they know that they're saying is untrue in most cases, because most seminaries do teach some real scholarship that casts some doubt on what they're telling in a devotional aspect to their flock.
Why do you think they specifically choose rock? They went into it a few times in the film and talked about how it promoted certain things like sexuality and God knows what else. But really, there seems to be maybe something, or it seemed to me as if that wasn't really the primary motive. There was something else behind it. Perhaps it was the fact that at the very beginning we saw that it made them lose control, a certain type of authority over their child or over other people within that particular community who then wouldn't show up to church because they realized that there was more to life than just what the Bible or God knows what else was actually teaching them. So it seemed to be more to me about at least control than about the sins that they were claiming that it caused people to do or caused people to think about. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I've actually researched the whole anti-rock movement starting from the 50s onward. It reached its peak during the Satanic Panic of the 1980s in America, and it lasted all the way on through to the late 90s. It's died down quite a bit, but the threat they felt from rock music was pretty much what you said. It was a loss of control over the culture. They had their sacred music, their hymns, and